Hi everyone, I'm Max, and my presentation is about the ongoing war between NVIDIA and AMD, which are the companies that make the chips powering almost every game we play. I'll explore how these rivalries affect gaming and esports. To start us off, I will be talking a little bit about my past with gaming PCs and the specs I had. Starting in 2018, I got my dad's old Dell Office workstation, which was a full-size tower. It came paired with an Intel i7 2600 and a GTX 550 Ti, which are both from, I believe, 2011. By the time I already started using the computer, it became obsolete. So I ended up just playing basic games like CSGO and Fortnite on low graphics, which was just okay for me because I needed it mostly to get homework done at home. As time progressed, I slowly began upgrading the hardware into the somewhat of a Frankenstein computer. First, I started with upgrading the hard drive from an HDD to an SSD, which meant quicker loading time for starting games, loading into maps, or even just turning on the computer and booting into Windows. However, this really didn't solve the bigger issue, being that my important hardware wasn't good enough to play modern games. So next I upgraded to a GTX 970, which came out in 2014. This improvement made the difference between night and day. I was finally able to play solid AAA games in the 60 frame rate ballpark, um, with decent graphics quality, and some of those games were Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, Far Cry, and I believe Battlefield 5. I wasn't too big on games back in high school. I would just play them whenever I wanted to pass some time, which was almost never the case. Sometimes months or even half a year would go by without me ever turning on the computer. So I was content with the computer for the time being. However, when I went to college, my roommate brought his gaming PC and it was relatively good. He'd let me use it every now and then. However, I wanted to build my own computer not too long after that. So, after a couple of weeks, during the 2023 Black Friday sale, I ordered all the parts I needed to build a computer. The main decision factor for this PC was living on a college budget, so I switched over to a full AMD build. This is my current setup right over here. This is what I use to create and record this presentation. It works great for me, and I don't have any issues with it. I use it to run some hardware intensive games to unwind and play with my friend back at home or my cousins down in Florida, as well as get some homework done every now and then when I need a dual screen setup, which has proven itself very useful in college. Anyways, that's enough about me. Let's dive into the core of this presentation now. So now we're officially getting into the main topic of this presentation, which is NVIDIA versus AMD, specifically in the gaming and esports world. Both companies make graphics cards that gamers rely on, but they take very different approaches in how they design their hardware and software. When people argue NVIDIA versus AMD, it's usually not just about which one has higher frames, but more about reliability, competitive features, pricing, and long-term usability. Over the next few slides, I'll break those differences down and explain why professional esports players usually favor one side over the other, while casual and budget players often favor the other, as you may recall. In esports, graphics cards aren't about making games look cinematic or ultra realistic. Instead, they're more about delivering extremely high and stable frame rates while minimizing input latency. Most competitive players actually lower their graphics settings on purpose. so the GPU can focus on pushing out as many frames as possible. When reaction times are measured in milliseconds, even small improvements in smoothness or responsiveness can influence gameplay outcomes. NVIDIA is currently the dominant player in the GPU market, especially at the higher end. They're known not just for performance, but for the ecosystem they've built around their hardware. In esports, NVIDIA GPUs are extremely common because they're trusted for their consistency, driver stability, and competitive focused features. Over time, NVIDIA has built a reputation as a safe and reliable option for high stakes competitive environments. AMD takes a different strategy. Instead of focusing as heavily on proprietary features, AMD emphasizes price to performance and open technologies. This makes AMD especially appealing to budget-conscious gamers and students because you can often get similar raw performance for less money. AMD also supports more flexible, open standards, meaning you're not as locked into the ecosystem. At this resolution and setting level, both NVIDIA and AMD GPUs perform very well. In many benchmark tests, the average frame rate numbers between comparable cards from each company are actually very close. So if you look at average frame rates on this chart, it might seem like the differences are minor or irrelevant. However, competitive players don't just care about the average number. What really matters is how the game feels moment to moment, especially during intensive situations like gunfights, team fights, or large explosions, which require more GPU processing power. These moments put sudden stress on the system, and that's where differences between GPUs become more noticeable. This is why performance discussions in esports go beyond simple frame rate numbers. Players care about smooth frame delivery, responsiveness, and how consistently the numbers perform under pressure. Even small drops or spikes in performance can be distracting in a competitive environment, which is why this topic matters more than it may seem at first. This is where 1% low frame rates become important. 1% lows show the worst performance dips, such as during big fights or explosions. NVIDIA GPUs often perform slightly better here, which leads to smoother gameplay with fewer stutters. For professional players, that consistency helps with tracking enemies, aiming accurately, and staying focused during matches. NVIDIA doesn't just focus on raw performance. A big part of their advantage in esports comes from their features that they build around their hardware. One of the most important of these is NVIDIA Reflex. Reflex is designed to reduce overall system latency by optimizing how the CPU, GPU, and monitor communicate with each other. In supported esports titles like Valorant, Counter-Strike 2, this can noticeably reduce the delay between a player clicking and seeing the result on screen. That kind of responsiveness really matters at the competitive level. Even though the difference might be measured in milliseconds, professional players are extremely sensitive to how responsive a game feels. Lower latency can lead to more accurate aiming, better tracking, and more consistent performance during fast-paced situations. Another major NVIDIA advantage is DLSS, which uses AI-based upscaling to increase frame rates. While DLSS isn't always used in esports titles, it can be helpful in certain situations where players want extra performance without lowering resolution further. Finally, NVIDIA Broadcast adds value for competitive players who also stream. Features like background noise removal and virtual backgrounds improve stream quality without requiring extra hardware. making NVIDIA especially appealing to streamers and content creators in the esports space. AMD's feature set takes a different approach compared to NVIDIA. Rather than focusing heavily on proprietary technologies, AMD emphasizes flexibility and open standards. One of the best examples of this is Fidelity FX Super Resolution, or FSR. Unlike DLSS, FSR works across a wide range of GPUs, including some NVIDIA cards, which makes it far more accessible. This flexibility is especially useful for players who upgrade their parts over time or don't want to be locked into one hardware ecosystem. Another important AMD feature is Smart Access Memory. When paired with an AMD CPU, this feature allows the CPU to access the GPU's full memory more efficiently, which can lead to performance gains in supported games. While the boost isn't massive in every title, it can provide extra frames at essentially no extra cost. AMD software also gives users a lot of control over performance settings, overlays, and tuning options. This appeals to gamers who like tweaking their systems and finding the best configuration for their needs. Overall, AMD's features are less about competitive only advantages and more about giving players strong performance, flexibility, and value. A lot of esports players don't just compete, they also stream or create content. NVIDIA's NVENC encoder is considered one of the best for streaming because it produces high quality video with very little impact on gaming performance. This allows competitive players to stream while maintaining a high frame rate, which is a big reason why NVIDIA is so popular among creators. When it comes to value, AMD often wins. At many price points, AMD GPUs offer similar raw performance for significantly less money. For students, casual competitors, and gaming labs, this can make AMD the more practical choice. You still get excellent esports performance without paying for the features you're unlikely to use. At professional esports tournaments, NVIDIA GPUs dominate. Tournament organizers prioritize reliability, stable drivers, and predictable performance. NVIDIA's long term presence in esports and close partnerships with game developers make their hardware a trusted choice when technical issues are not acceptable. For casual players or students getting into esports, AMD often makes more sense financially. Lower prices make competitive level gaming more accessible. And for professionals, NVIDIA's ecosystem and latency focused features usually outweigh the higher cost. Both choices are valid depending on a player's goal. To summarize, NVIDIA excels in competitive features, low latency, and streaming support, while AMD shines in price to performance and accessibility. NVIDIA is usually favored in professional esports environments, while AMD is an excellent option for casual and entry level gamers. So, when it comes to a final verdict, there really isn't one single winner for everyone. NVIDIA tends to be the better choice for professional esports players and higher level competitors. Features like NVIDIA Reflex, stronger streaming support, and very consistent performance gives it an edge in serious competitive environments where reliability matters way more than cost. On the other hand, AMD is often the better choice for the majority of gamers. For casual players, students, and people building budget or mid-range PCs, AMD usually offers more performance for the money. You can get very high frame rates in esports titles without paying the premium that often comes with NVIDIA cards. In the end, the decision comes down to priorities. If you're aiming for professional competition, streaming, and the lowest possible latency, NVIDIA makes the most sense. If you want strong gaming performance at a better price and don't need every competitive feature, AMD is probably the smarter choice. So that would be my review and quick rundown about the rivalry between AMD and NVIDIA, which has been around for decades. And I appreciate you all for listening.